Thanks for tuning in to the Oxygen Alliance YouTube channel, where we share the Concentrator Talk virtual meeting hosted every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Central African Time. In the talk, we discuss different aspects of oxygen concentrator assessment, use, and maintenance. And please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell. Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to week 22 of the Oxygen Concentrator Talk, brought to you by the Oxygen Alliance. My name is Mwawi Lungu, and I'm very pleased to be hosting the call today. Joining me are my colleagues, Mteto Sinjani and Timothy Mtonga, along with our technicians from OpenO2 and Sunrise. So for those of you that may not be aware, the Concentrator Talk is a virtual meeting that the Oxygen Alliance hosts every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Central African Time. So here we discuss the different aspects of oxygen concentrator use, assessment, and repairs. So if you have any questions that you'd like us to assist you with, we always encourage you to send them to us in advance through our email address, info@oxygenalliance.org, and our technicians will do their best to help you out with all the problems you are facing. So on the technicians panel today, we have Paulina Mohosho joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. We have Kowinda Singh joining us from Chandigarh, India. And we have Sharon Gozo, Linda Mishoni, Daphne Magela, and Francis Sambani, and Georgie Kwanga joining us from Lilongwe, Malawi. So as we normally do, we are also going to have a topic of interest. And today we'll be talking about the different alarms that the different models of oxygen concentrators produce. So just in case you have some questions during the session, we also encourage you to just raise your hand, or you can just type it in the chat, and then we'll do our best to respond either during the call, or if not, we'll respond to the question in our next Concentrator Talk session. All right, so now to jump on to our questions for today. So our first question says, I am a biomedical engineer. As I was assessing oxygen concentrators in the wards of a certain hospital, I came across an Airsep concentrator that was on a patient that was producing so much noise, and the low oxygen LED was on. When I listened to the concentrator, the sound seemed to be coming from one of the sieve beds since it was leaking. When I took the concentrator for an assessment to the workshop, I found out that the pipe that was supposed to be connected to the sieve bed was loose. What might have caused this, and how can this be prevented? So I will ask Sharon to answer this one.
Thank you, Maui. In your scenario, you need to conduct user training for the nurses and ward attendants. Let them know that when a concentrator is producing a hissing sound, or if they have observed a change in sound, they should never use it on a patient. Rather, they have to call a technician to check it out or take it to the maintenance department for assessment. So for Airsep concentrators, when the oxygen LED is not turning off, then the purity of the concentrator is low and it needs maintenance. So pipes become loose when they are not tied with a cable tie or hose clips. Pipes also become loose over time due to high pressures found in an oxygen concentrator. And sometimes when moving the concentrator from one place to another, due to some vibrations, a pipe can become loose. So as you can see on the diagram, when working on a concentrator and you're connecting pipes, make sure you cut off the ends of the pipes that have become stretched or are loose over time with a cutter, and then reconnect it. Use a tie wrap to give the pipe a tight fit. In this way, the pipe won't come loose again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for that answer. I hope that was clear for everyone, but in case we have some questions that we would like to ask or some comments that we would like to make, we are always free to add on to the explanation that has been given. So we have a poll at the end of these questions. So Teto, if you would please launch that poll.
Yeah, so thanks, Maui. I'm going to launch the poll. So the first poll says, have you ever found a malfunctioning concentrator being used on a patient? So maybe Maui, if you would want to just remind people where to access the polls.
Yes, so if you are joining us from your mobile phone, if you go to the bottom right of your screen and click on the menus option, a window will open up, and on that window, you will find the activities button. So it's like a triangle, a square, and a circle. So if you click on the activities button, it will take you to another window where the pause menu is one of the options listed. If you are joining us from your computer, then you also go to the bottom right of your screen and the icon on the far right. It's also a triangle, a rectangle, and a circle stacked on top of each other. So if you click on that, another window will be opened, and pause menu is one of the options listed there. Thank you, Ted.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Maui. So it seems like this is a very common problem where people are using the concentrator in the wards that is malfunctioning, because I have like more votes for that favor. Thanks, Maui.
Thank you very much, Tato. So moving on to our second question. So our next question says, I am a biomedical technician at a district hospital. I was working on an Everflow Respironics concentrator. The concentrator had a problem of sieve beds blocking air from the compressor. I found this out after assessing the concentrator. I opened the sieve beds and removed the zeolite. I found lumps inside the sieve beds, and the zeolite had a lot of powder. I cleaned the sieve beds and refilled them. Then I installed them back into the concentrator. After making all the connections, I switched on the concentrator and the valves were switching fine. No more blocking of air in the sieve bed, and the purity was 95.6. When I closed the concentrator and switched it on for a 2-hour test, the concentrator raised an alarm. The yellow and red LED were on and the purity started dropping. The concentrator was even getting hot. What might have caused this, and how can I solve this problem? So I will ask Paulina to answer this one.
Thank you, Moabi, for the question. Firstly, take note that the alarms are installed in a concentrator to alert the user that something is malfunctioning in the concentrator. So from your explanation, you did a great job on your assessment. The lamps and the powder in the beds were blocking the air passage. When you noticed that the concentrator raised an alarm and showed the yellow and the red light, you had to switch off the concentrator and unscrew it, open it, and monitor the behavior inside. So the yellow and the red LED that is being illuminated at the same time shows that the device has detected and impeded oxygen flow condition as indicated in the service manual. So what you would need to do now is to open your machine, connect it to a power source and switch it on, observe how every part is functioning, and also keep the machine running to monitor the behavior inside the machine during operation, so you'll be able to find what the cause is. So for a concentrator that gets hot during the 2 hours test, you might want to check the fan if it's working perfectly well. Check if the fan is rotating. If it's not, then replace it with a new one. If it is rotating, then check if it's getting the rated voltage and verify if there is continuity on the fan wiring harness, and be sure that the fan is not obstructed. Also make sure that the valves are getting the 12-volt power from the board, and check if they are switching. So most valves switch on a 4-second interval, so you would just need to listen to the switching of the valve if the interval is correct and all of that. So also be sure that there is no bending or kinking of any pipe as this can restrict air movement, causing the compressor to work harder, resulting in the compressor getting hot. Before closing the concentrator, monitor the purity, the temperature, and how the components are performing for 30 minutes or more. If the concentrator performs well, then something might have gone wrong when you were closing the machine the first time. So always ensure that when you close a concentrator, you need to be mindful of the pipes. They shouldn't be bent, and the fan also shouldn't be obstructed. Yes, that's it. I think this will be of help in solving the problem. Thank you, Mabi.
Thank you very much, Paulina, for that explanation. Just in case we have some questions from the audience or some comments, we are free to ask or make those additional comments.
Yeah, there's a question in Q&A, and I think it's related to the first question or this one. So it's from Kelbert. Are you able to access that?
Yeah. So the question says, is it a must for green light to show before using your oxygen concentrator? So I think this one is related to Sharon's question, if I'm not mistaken. So Sharon, do you mind answering this one?
Sure. So when you're switching on the concentrator, for the concentrators that have the LED, that's the oxygen LED, when you're switching it on, yeah, they have to be on for some time. So like after 4 to 5 minutes, then they have to turn off, meaning that the purity is now good. But if they are on for more than 5 minutes, more than 7 minutes, then something is wrong. Thank you.
Yes, MT, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to also put a comment because sometimes these concentrators, the LED might be dead. So the best way to use a concentrator or before you start using it is you test the oxygen purity, because we have seen like on Devilbisses whereby the front panel, all the LEDs are dead, but then the concentrator is producing the required oxygen purity. Yeah.
Great. Do we have some additional comments on this one? Okay, seems we do not. All right. So we'll be moving on with our questions. So our next question says, Airsep 5-liter oxygen concentrator is giving low purity with a fluctuation of between 50 to 60%. I serviced the compressor and changed the zeolite. The purity improved to 93% with a fluctuation between 93 and 85%. Considering that this isn't okay, what can be the problem and how can I rectify this? So I will ask Kuwinda to answer this one.
Thanks, Mavi. It seems this concentrator has multiple problems. What is required is to do proper troubleshooting and solving the problem as they are found. So one of the root causes of fluctuation is the faulty four-way or the solenoid valve, as we can see in the pictures. Because one are the four solenoid valves, we have to check it. We can check it by the multimeter also. The resistance it varies from 800 to 4200 ohms depending upon the model. And if either of the valves is not working effectively, that might result in fluctuation. If one side is falling to switch on open, this lessens the ability to maintain the maximum in and out product tank pressure, thereby resulting in fluctuation. So it is advisable to replace the defective one with the good one to maintain the required purity. So other reason can be the leakages that can cause fluctuation as well. So test around all the connections, make sure the connections are all right by applying soapy water around them. So the main points can be the seabed connections, regulator, tank, and the check valves. Other reason can be the broken or the faulty flow meter gives room to the fluctuations. The broken flow meter allows air to escape and this results in fluctuation. So blockage obstruction in the intake pathway causes fluctuation. Make sure if any blockage is found, clear it for the best functionality of the machine. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you very much,
Hello.
Kowinda. Sorry, I had trouble finding my unmute button there. So I hope that was clear for everyone else. But in case we have some question or comments, we are free to ask or add on to the explanation that Kowinda has just given us. All right, so if we don't have questions, we also have another poll at the end of this question. So Mteto, can you please launch the poll?
Sure, thanks, Maui. So I've launched the poll. So the poll is basically asking about, have you ever come across purity fluctuations before? So this one is very interesting. So like, I just want to put out a comment, Maui. I have personally come across a block-in flow meter on an Airsep. It had clacks. So one of the techniques that I did was to actually block the patient's outlet, and I could notice that the bore wasn't going down fully. So that was like part of troubleshooting, but I think the rest is what actually Kowinda has explained.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it seems like this is also a common problem. So it seems like people have come across these purity fluctuations. Yeah, I'm gonna end the poll now.
All right, thank you very much, Mteto. So moving on with our questions. So our next question says, and we got this question last week during our oxygen talk session. So the question came from Noel. So I hope he's on the call to get the answer. So his question was, how do you fix the problem with compressor relief valve purging continuously? So this month I have revived 5 oxygen concentrators of different models, and 2 of them have purging problems. So I will ask Sharon to answer this one.
Thank you, Maui. So there are multiple reasons that can cause a leaf valve to be purging continuously. So firstly, it may be because that maybe your leaf valve is faulty. So to check if your leaf valve is faulty, you need to connect a pressure gauge to the exhaust and monitor if the leaf valve is kicking at 45 psi. If your leaf valve is faulty, I recommend that you replace it with a new one. Secondly, your solenoid valve or rotary valve might be faulty. So you have to check if the valves are getting their rated voltage from the board. You need a multimeter for this. So if they are receiving voltage from the board, you need to check continuity of the wire harness of the valves. And blocked beds can also cause the leaf valve to be purging, as they don't allow oxygen to pass through freely through the beds. So this results in build-up pressure in the compressor and the pipes. So to check if the beds are broken, then you need to disconnect one bed at a time. Be sure that the air is able to pass from the compressor to the bed. So try one bed at a time. If the beds are broken, then you need to open up the beds and remove the zeolite, refill with new zeolite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for that answer. If we have some comments or questions from the audience, as usual, we are free to ask or add on to the explanation that has been given. All right, it seems we do not have any questions there. So moving on with our questions. So our next question says, I am working on a 5 liter per minute Devilbiss oxygen concentrator. I just refilled the seatbeds with new zeolite, and I wanted to do a pressure test before I do a purity test, just to make sure that the pressure at the outlet is within a recommended pressure. So typically the bore in the flow meter has to drop down to the base of the flow meter if you close the patient's outlet. But in my scenario, whenever I put a pressure sensor on the outlet, the bore in the flow meter does not drop down to the base of the flow meter. And when I switch the concentrator off, the bore drops down to the base. What can be the problem and how can I fix it? So I will ask Linda to answer this one.
Thank you, Maui. So if the flow meter is not working as expected, here there's some steps you can do to take to troubleshoot and find the source of the problem you are facing currently. So the first thing to do is to check for leakages in the airways, starting from the patient outlet down to the product tank. To check for these leakages, disconnect the tube from the flow meter outlet as shown in the graphics, and that's the tube that has the bacteria filter and the check valve. Then use your thumb to seal the flow meter outlet, and if the bore inside the flow meter drops, it means the connecting tube you have just disconnected is the one that has the leakage and the flow meter is not broken. And you can also use soapy water to check if the tubing, the bacteria filter or the one-way valve is the one that has the leakage. Replace the tube, the bacteria filter and the check valve if they are leaking, and reconnect it to the flow meter outlet. And this should fix the problem. But if you remove the flow meter outlet tubing and you still have the bore floating when you close the patient outlet, then the flow meter might be broken. So you have to replace it with a working flow meter. And when replacing the flow meter, ensure that you replace it with a flow meter of the same flow rate and also the same concentrator model. Since the flow meters, they may have same flow rate of different concentrator models, can have same flow rate, but then they are calibrated to work at different pressures. So you have to replace it with the flow meter of the same concentrator model. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for that explanation. If we have some questions from the audience or some additional comments from the other technicians, as usual, we are free to add on to the explanation that she has just given us. All right, it seems we do not have any questions there. So we'll now take a break from our questions and jump on to our topic of interest. So as I explained at the beginning, today we'll be talking about alarms. So Francis is going to take us through that explanation. So over to you, Francis.
Thank you, Maui. So as Maui already pointed it out, today we'll be looking at oxygen concentrator alarms. So firstly, we'll look at the definition of an alarm. And an alarm is a warning and or it can also be an audio alert representing the possibility of harm, and that harm can be either to the operator or the unit itself. So medical devices have alarms, and these alarms are intended to keep the patient safe by alerting nurses to potential problems. And oxygen concentrators have a lot of alarms which have specific characteristics. So these alarms include the low purity alarm, the low pressure alarm, high pressure alarm, the loss of power alarm or power failure alarm, and then you have the overheating alarm, the low flow alarm, and the high flow alarm. So it is worth noting that most concentrators will produce a continuous sound alarm for some seconds when they've just been turned on. This is normal, so don't be alarmed when it happens. In the Airsep model, for example, the startup alarm is a continuous sound which sounds for 5 seconds each time the unit is turned on to indicate that the battery is in good condition. So if you turn an Airsep model and you don't hear an alarm for 5 seconds from the moment you've turned it on, that means there's a problem with the battery and it needs to be replaced or you need to check it up. So we'll start by looking at the low purity alarm. And So the primary function of an oxygen concentrator is to give out oxygen, which according to WHO, World Health Organization, it should always be above 82%. So this alarm is there to make sure that the user is getting the required period of oxygen from the concentrator itself. For the Devilbiss 515, when the oxygen period is below the normal oxygen, so in this case, the normal oxygen for the 515 is above 83.5%. So when it is below 83.5% and up to 75%, the yellow or low oxygen light will turn on without an audible alarm. And when the purity is less than 75%, that is from 60 to 75%, the yellow, which is the low oxygen alarm, will light up, and also it is accompanied by a beeping audible alarm. So that is when it is between 60 and 75. And when it is less than 60, the purity, when the purity is less than 60%, the required service or the red light will go on, as well as the beeping audible alarm. In our graphics, next slide, please. In our graphics, we have the low oxygen and the service required alarm on the 515. So those are the two alarms I've been talking about. And if we look at the Devilbiss 1025, so the programming is different for the 1025. So the 1025 is the one you can see on the right. And so for the 1025, after 15 minutes of stabilization time, that is from when you turn it on, if the oxygen is less than 85%, the yellow low oxygen LED will be on and a beeping audible alarm will occur. So if the level is below 60%, that is from startup and after 15 minutes, then the yellow and the red LEDs will be lit along with the beeping audible alarm. And the audible low oxygen alarms are blocked during the 15-minute stabilization delay and also during the 10-minute stabilization delay, which occurs during turn down mode. So yeah, the 15-minute stabilization delay is when you just turn it on. Yeah, and the 10-minute stabilization delay for the turn down mode is, okay, so let me just say what the turn down mode is. So the turn down mode in the 1025 is when you've reduced the flow to less than 4.5 liters per minute. So when you've reduced the flow to less than or equal to 4.5 liters per minute, it changes the sequencing time, as in how long it takes to feed bed A and sieve bed B. So it is, in essence, it turns down the cycle based on the lower oxygen demand. So that's the turn down mode. So for those times, you don't get any alarms. So that's for the 1025, and we can see the low period LED in the graphics. So moving on and looking at the Longfian J5 or the J10, the oxygen concentration will rise to the normal level in 5 minutes of operation. So the low purity alarm goes off when the oxygen purity is less than 85% or plus or minus 3%. It is accompanied with an audible alarm sound as well. So the alarms, the LED, the low oxygen LED is written LO2. Yeah. So that is the low oxygen alarm we can see in the graphics. So you also have an audible alarm accompanied with it as well. And when the oxygen is above 85%, you have a blue lamp, which is labeled HO2. Yeah, so that is when the purity is above 85%. So that's on the J5 and the J10. And on the invacare perfecto, and the invacare perfecto will show a yellow indicator when the purity is within. So when the purity is within, excuse me for a minute. All right, sorry. Yeah, so when the purity is above 85%, you have the green indicator light, and when the purity is within 73 and 85%, you have the yellow indicator light. So it can either be a solid yellow or a flashing yellow light. So you don't have any sound for when the period is between 73 and 85%. And when the period is below 73%, you have a red indicator light accompanied with a continuous audible alarm. So that's on the invacare perfecto. And that is it on the low purity alarms. So we'll move on to the low pressure alarms. So on the low pressure alarm, in the Devilbiss 525, for example, when the system pressure is below 9 psi or 62.1 kPa due to a leak in the system or a weak compressor, both the visible and audible alarm will turn on. So the visible alarm is the service required, and then the audible alarm is just the beep. So that's for the 525. And for the 1025, this alarm is referred to as the pressure failure alarm, and it turns on within 30 minutes if the safe beds are not receiving the desirable pressure. So you have the service required alarm gets activated as well as the beeping sound. So moving on to the Airsep Elite or the Airsep Intensity, you have an intermediate alarm if the low pressure indicator is activated. This usually occurs if the seatbelts are not receiving the required pressure. So it can either be due to low output pressure from the compressor or if you have a leak as well. So it is actually usually accompanied with a low oxygen alarm, because when the seatbelts are receiving less pressure than required, you get low purity oxygen as well. So for the Airsep model, you have the low pressure LED on the control board itself. So you have to open it up for you to see, that is. So it's the one you can see in the graphics. And moving on to the Longfian J5 and the J10, there's a pressure sensor on the main board to check the system pressure. So this pressure sensor is connected to the valve block, and when the pressure is lower than 100 kPa, there's an audible alarm with the yellow indicator. So the yellow indicator is for the low pressure, labeled LP. Yeah. So the oxygen concentrator will still run if you're getting low pressure from the compressor or if you have a leak. So this alarm may mean that there's a leakage or a weak compressor, as already said. Yeah. So if we look at the graphics, we have so this was taken from a concentrator which was receiving less pressure than required, and you have the LP low pressure LED on, as well as the low oxygen alarm as well. So that's on the Longfian J5 and the J10. And moving on to the next alarm, that is the high pressure alarm. So we'll first look at the Airsep Elite and the Airsep Intensity. So for the Airsep Elite and Intensity, you get an intermittent alarm if the high pressure indicator is activated. So the high pressure alarm can be caused by a rise in pressure due to defective sieve beds or 40 solenoid valves or a restriction in the exhaust muffler. So if you have either of these problems, you are likely to get a high pressure alarm. And the high pressure LED is the upper LED, which is seen in the graphics. For the Longfian J10, when the pressure is higher than 230 kPa, there's an audible alarm with the red indicator on. So you have the HP LED on. So for the J5 and the J10, when the pressure is higher than 230 kPa, the oxygen concentrator stops running. So that's it. And on the invacare perfecto as well, the high pressure alarm occurs when the product tank rises beyond, when the product tank pressure, that is, rises beyond the preset value. So the preset value depends on the invacare perfecto. So for the 5-liter invacare, the preset pressure is 23 psi plus or minus 1 psi. And for the 10-liter invacare unit, the set pressure is 27 psi plus or minus 1 psi. So the high pressure alarm is usually followed by a compressor shutdown in the invacare perfecto, just like the Longfian J5. And that's it on the high pressure alarms. Moving forward to the low power alarm, loss of power alarm, sorry. So if you have a power failure, concentrators will give off an alarm to alert the user that there is power loss. Power for the power failure alarm may be provided by a 9-volt battery or either a capacitor on the control board. Looking at the Devilbiss 1025, the audible alert will activate for a minimum of 2 minutes if no power in a no power situation. So you don't have a visual indicator for this alarm in the Devilbiss 1025. And if this unit is turned on without power or power is removed later, the alert will sound within 10 seconds. After time, the alert will produce an audible burst every few seconds. So power for this alert is usually provided by a capacitor on the control board. It is worth noting that in the Devilbiss 515, the power failure alarm alerts you with a blinking service required light as well as a pressing audible alarm. So that's it on the Devilbiss 515 and the 1025. Moving on to the Airsep Elite and Airsep Intensity, still on the power loss alarm. These new life oxygen concentrators are equipped with a battery powered alarm system, unlike the 1025, the Devilbiss 1025. So this gives out a continuous and loud alarm when power failure occurs. So the alarm is characterized by the unit not running with constant audio alarm while the IO switch is in the I position. Apart from power failure itself, this alarm can also be triggered by the tripped by a tripped or 40 circuit breaker or 40 electrical problems. It can also be tripped by a 40 IO switch or a 40 circuit board. So those might also be causes for this alarm being tripped in the Airsep Elite or Airsep Intensity oxygen concentrators. For the Longfian J5 or J10, in cases of loss of mains power or when the power cord is not plugged into the wall circuit, an audible alarm is activated with a red indicator on. So the red indicator that you usually see is the PF or the power failure LED as shown on the graphics. And in the invacare perfecto, if mains power is lost, the battery power loss alarm will sound a short beep, which is followed by a long pause after. And moving on with the alarms, now to the overheating alarm. These alarms go on when the inside temperature is higher than a certain set level. Since the compressor is what causes the concentrator to overheat, most concentrators will have a thermofuse or a thermal switch, which will shut down the compressor when the compressor overheats. For the Longfian J5 or J10, there is a temperature sensor on the main board to check the internal temperature. And when the temperature is higher than 50 degrees Celsius in the oxygen concentrator, there is an audible alarm with a red indicator on the panel, which is labeled HT, high temperature. So, and also the oxygen concentrator will stop running. So it is also worth saying that the compressor windings have a thermal safety. So you won't find the thermofuse as which is as in the Airsep model, you can easily see it. But then in the J5, the compressor windings have a thermal safety, which is ensured by a thermal switch situated in the motor windings themselves. And this thermal switch is rated at 145 degrees Celsius plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius. So just a side note, for some concentrators like the Airsep models in extreme cold, an intermediate alarm goes on and the compressor does not start while the cabinet fans turn when the concentrator is turned on. So for some concentrators, when the temperature is below 25 degrees Celsius, the compressor won't turn on. So you have to make sure that you're operating the concentrator in room temperature. And now moving on to the low flow or lack of oxygen alarm. We'll look at the Devilbiss 525. So the low flow in the Devilbiss 525 is indicated by a visible service required indicator and also by an audible alarm. So for the 525, you want to get the service required and the beeping sound from the concentrator. And for the 1025, the case is slightly different in a way that the low flow alarm is activated if the flow meter bore is set below 2 liters per minute. So anything less than 2 liters per minute, you get the low flow alarm for the Devilbiss 1025. So the unit continues to run. However, the service required light will come on accompanied with an audible alarm. So what you need to do is you just need to adjust the flow meter to the prescribed flow in the 1025 model. And we can see the service required in the graphics as well, LEDs. And moving on to the last alarm that we'll cover today, that is the high flow alarm. So we'll only talk about the Devilbiss 1025 in the on the high flow alarm. So in the Devilbiss 1025, what will happen is that you get an audible alarm when the flow is set above 10 liters per minute, and the yellow light will turn on. So you also get the low oxygen alarm, as well as the when you set the flow above 10 liters per minute. So it is worth noting that for most concentrators, you have, when you set your flow meter above the rated flow, if it's a 5-liter oxygen concentrator, that means you set it above 5, or if it's an 8, you set it above 8, you get the low oxygen alarm. So I guess that comes in place of the high flow alarm, because it will just alert you that you're giving out less oxygen purity to the patient. So coming this far, this is the end of our topic of interest. Thank you, and over to you, Maui.
Thank you very much, Francis, for that wonderful topic. A lot of things there that I've picked up. Actually, I didn't know that the 1025 had that ability to adjust its sequencing, so which is a good thing. So I hope you also picked up a lot from that. So if we have some questions or comments on the topic of interest that Francis has just presented to us, as usual, we're always free to raise our hands, and then we can ask questions that we might have.
So I see there's a question in the Q&A section.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question from Gresham. So he says, we have tried to look for the battery in the new life intensity, but we cannot find it on the sides of the sieve bed. Where else can we find? Because it gives the no power alarm we check. So Francis, do you want to comment on this one?
If I'm not mistaken, the battery for the Airsep is not found on the sides of the sieve bed, but then you find it on the like on the flat bar where everything sits, like for example the product tank. So just look around there, you have a white buzzer, and also you should find the battery somewhere around there. The exact location right now I can't remember it, but then somewhere around that area.
Yeah, so I think it's actually behind the power switch. It's behind the power switch. There's like a reset button, but sometimes if the battery is not missing, there might actually be the battery holder inside. It's usually black in color. So maybe the 9 volts battery is missing, but then the battery holder is there.
George, you also had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what Keto has said. Usually it's behind the power button, slightly below the where the flow meter is. So maybe the issue might be that the battery is missing, so they can't locate where it's located because they can't see the battery itself.
Okay, so I see Michael has also commented in the chat. He's saying it's always behind the power button. So I guess he's agreeing with what George and Teto have just pointed out. All right, so before we proceed, for those of you that are just joining us and it's your first time to join the call, we welcome you to the Concentrator Talk. So we are here every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Central African Time. And please share with us your name and where you're joining from in the chat. Also share with us your email address so that we can add you to our mailing list, so that we can be sending you updates from the Oxygen Alliance and reminders of the next Oxygen Concentrator Talk call. So please do that in the chat. So moving on with our questions now. So our next question says, we have had a Longfian J5 in our maintenance workshop for over 6 months now. The problem with this concentrator is that the compressor is damaged beyond repair and needs replacement. Currently, we have a compressor from an Airsep model, Thomas 2660. Is it okay if we retrofit the 2660 compressor into the Longfian J5? So I'll ask George to answer this one.
Thank you, Maui. So when retrofitting compressors, the main factors to look at are the maximum output pressure, the volume of air the compressor delivers, that is liters per minute of air or cubic feet per minute. So the compressor you want to use should have about the same maximum output pressure as the compressor to be replaced. The Thomas 2660 has a maximum output pressure of 45 psi. Of course, this compressor model can give an output much more pressure than 45 psi when you block the pressure relief valve. So it is worth noting that the maximum output pressure, the Thomas 2660, is based on the relief pressure of the relief valve. So I would advise you to compare the maximum output pressure of the compressor in the J5 and compare it with the maximum output pressure of the Thomas 2660. You can find the maximum output pressure for the compressor in the data sheet, and then after do that, you find that the two compressors have about the same output pressure. You can retrofit one on the other, and you'll be able to get the desired performance from the concentrator that you are working on. So for every compressor you like to retrofit, you make sure that they have about the same output pressure, and the compressor you like to use will fit in the concentrator you like to fit in, as sometimes the compressor might have the same output pressure, but the other compressor can't fit in the concentrator you want to fix due to size differences. So you need to pay much attention to those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, for that explanation. If we have some questions for George regarding that questions, as usual, we're always free to ask or make those additional comments. You can also just paste your questions in the chat and I'll read them out for the audience. All right, no questions. So we'll be moving on to our next question. So our next question says, what is the use of an hour meter? So I will ask Daphne to answer this one.
Thank you, Maui. So an hour meter is also referred to as Hobbs meter. So I'll give a brief background on that. Hobbs was the first company to make a meter like this. So this is how they got that name. Hobbs meters were first used in aircraft to keep track of how many hours have been flown. This information was used to schedule routine maintenance of the aircraft. So likewise, in our case, an hour meter tracks down the number of hours the concentrator has been running. For most old models of concentrators, the hour meter is analog, meaning the numbers move mechanically. And for new models, the meter is digital, as we can see on the graphics examples of an analog and a digital hour meter. While the digital version is cheaper, if there is a problem with the control board, the number of hours on the concentrator can be lost. Some of the components on the concentrator have to be changed depending on the number of hours. For instance, in the Devilbiss 525, the intake filter is to be changed after 10,000 hours or sooner if it is visibly dirty. So in summary, the hour meter is essentially used to track how long your concentrator has been running. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you very much, Daphne, for that explanation. In case we have some questions from the audience, as usual, we are free to ask or make some additional comments. All right, so moving on to our final question of the day now. So the question says, I am a biomedical technician and I was servicing oxygen concentrators this week when I came across a Devilbiss 525 concentrator, which had the low oxygen purity LED on. And after a thorough troubleshooting, I found out that there was water in the product tank. What could have caused this and how can this problem be solved? So I will ask Kowinda to answer this one.
Thanks, Murali. Humidifier bottles connected to the outlet fitting of concentrators are used to moisturize the oxygen which is delivered to the patient during therapy. Whenever an oxygen concentrator is switched off, there is a back pressure which is created. It is this back pressure that causes water in the humidifier bottle to flow into the unit. So the water ends up in the product tank and sometimes it may reach the seabeds resulting in the contamination of zeolite. So in some concentrators such as Devilbiss 515, there is a one-way valve which is also called a check valve. So the one-way valve located between the final bacteria filter and the outlet fitting of the concentrator. When the unit is turned off and the oxygen flow stops, the one-way valve closes, preventing water from being drawn into the unit. So therefore, to solve this problem, you should drain all the water from the product tank and dry any water droplets in the tubings. Then you should refill the seabeds with new zeolite since the moisture has affected the performance of the zeolite contained in the seabeds, or can replace the seabeds with the new one. Finally, in order to prevent this problem from recurring, since some concentrator models do not have the final check valve, and we recommend you to install a one-way valve between the final bacteria filter and the outlet fitting of the concentrator. So this can solve the problem, or we can also use water traps available now in the market to prevent this problem also. Thank you.
Kowinda, for that explanation. I hope that was clear for everyone. But in case we have some questions or additional comments that we'd like to make, we are always free to add on to the explanation that has been given. All right, so it seems we do not have any questions. So reaching this far, this now brings us to the end of our Concentrator Talk call today. And I would like to thank you all for joining us for today's session. And we hope to see you again in our next call. So last week, we had our monthly oxygen talk. And for those of you that may have missed that session, you can find it on our YouTube channel. So we record every session. So if you just search for Oxygen Alliance on YouTube, you'll be able to find it. And if you go on our list of videos, you'll be able to find the recording to our oxygen talk. So last week we were talking about cylinders and cylinder safety. So if you're interested, please visit our YouTube channel and don't forget to subscribe once you get there. We also have a website. So Metre, if you can please paste it in the chat. So everything concentrator related is also posted on our website. So if you have some issues that you would like us to help you out with, you can check out our website and maybe the solution might be there somewhere. But in case you don't find your solution, then you can always email us through our email address, info@oxygenalliance.org. So until next time, I would like to wish you a great weekend and we'll see you again in our next call. Goodbye, everyone.